Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Tuesday's Epay Tips and Changes webinar for the week of February the 8th, 2016. Now, as we do with all sessions, we have everyone on mute right now, so please ask all your questions via the GoToWebinar question area of the control panel, and I'll be happy to address them at the appropriate time during our conversations today. Now, this webinar is being recorded, and all other supporting videos and documentation can be found on Gateway, and or you can always go to YouTube and just simply search for Epay for ISS Facility Services, and you will be able to pull up all the different recorded webinars from all our different Epay tips and changes sessions, along with all of our trainings we've done thus far this year. Now, as you've read in our Epay updates, we have a few topics we want to cover today on today's session. We're going to start with the remaining granular security changes as they relate to employee default task and shift tab, and that is something that's found on the employee record. We'll also go through the job holiday and exception date tab that's found on the job record. We're then going to go into and review the employee process. More importantly, the new hire issues, the terminated employee issues we've been experiencing, and then wrap up with a conversation on pay groups. And essentially, what are they? What can they be changed? And kind of questions surrounding what the purpose of a pay group is. So let's get started. As always, we'll go through a few slides, and then in parts of this, some study sections, I'll go and do a live demo so you can actually see where it is in Blueforce. So let's get started. Our first topic we're going to cover is the granular security changes as they relate to the employee default task and shift tab. Now, for this particular tab, the purpose of it is essentially to provide Blueforce with information as to what the employee's shift and primary task is as relates to that job. So that way the system knows what task should be associated to that particular employee when they go and punch in. Now, in some of our devices, we do have that functionality turned on where it will prompt the employee to enter a task or simply accept their default task. Now, if they accept their default task, this is where the system looks to pull that information from. Now, the default shift and task default via the interface from JDE and the info driven from the employee's detailed screen in JDE. So in saying that, the employee is set up a certain way. That is kind of what the system is going to try to populate in Blueforce for them. Now, if that JDE job title is incorrect or the desired task is not applicable to the job that the employee has access to working, then Blueforce will default this info by simply applying the default task for that job. So the example I like to give here is a custodian. Many of us have access to all the jobs in a particular area. So when an employee tries to have access to all those jobs and they go in and try to clock in at a job that's not the normal job, and let's say this job is an engineering job and they're custodians, what's going to happen is the system is going to say, well, there's no custodian task on this job. Therefore, I can only assume that the default task for this job should be an engineering-related job, so I'm make him an engineer. So when he clocks into that job, since it's not a cleaning job, the employee's task will automatically default when they punch in to that engineer job or whatever task is engineered task, or whatever task is set as a default. Now, that is one of the reasons I bring this up today on this call, because we experience this all the time when it comes to your time cards. When you go look at the time cards, you see an employee sitting there with a wrong task. Now, it is urgent to go and fix that because that task plays a big role in the GL coding. So when it goes back into JDE, and from financial reporting standpoint, that task plays into the big picture of where the labor is going to be coded and where it's going to hit on the general ledger. Now, furthermore, the tab itself that I'll show you here a little bit is actually going to assist with two of the key components of Blueforce. It's going to assist with the lunch rules. So if a default shift is set up on an employee record, and if there are lunch rules in play, the employee is not assigned to a specific shift based on the job schedules. So I think most of us have gone through the scheduling class, and if you haven't, next week I'll be doing a scheduling class again. You can go through that, and we'll go through that piece kind of a more detailed piece on that during that session. But they're not assigned to a job schedule, then the lunch rules are actually set up for the shift, and that's what's going to apply here. So keep in mind, if they are, you need lunch rules. Lunch rules are actually based on the job set, on the job level, but more so at the shift level. So when you have a default shift in play where there's no employee, where the employee is not scheduled or assigned to a specific shift on the schedule, then the default shift is going to apply those rules behind that. Now, otherwise, the lunch rules apply based on the assigned shift on the job schedule. The job schedule shift trumps everything. But in those cases where you don't have that schedule in play, then you actually look at this level here, the default shift and task tab. It also assists with pay differential rules. So in saying that as well, we can go and put some pay differentials to work certain ways based on the shift an employee works. If an employee has a default shift of 7 to 3, and then we have another employee with a default shift of 3 to 11, and we know that if they work the 3 to 11 shift, they're going to actually get an additional $1. We could actually build, and we, being myself or Tiandra, could actually build this roll up to look at all the employees that are working or assigned to this particular shift. And in that case, the shift becomes a big part of this process. So it's very important the employee is set up correctly when you're doing anything with a default shift and task. All right, so let me, I've got a question out here, so give me 1 second, let me read it. All right, so one of the questions says, basically, this user is curious what the financial analysts are supposed to use because there doesn't seem to be an option for this user in question. So I'm currently using the crew member, but I think that belongs to landscaping, so I'm hearing what you just said, that is a problem. Probably answer this offline. No problem. I want to address it here because when you have a default shift and task, and actually let me go to the next slide here so you can actually see what I'm talking about. And I'll go into Blue Force here next so you can actually see it live. But on each employee record, there is a tab at the bottom of the screen that you have access to seeing, in which is just labeled default shift and task. On that, you can go and see all the jobs the employee has access, is able to work on. And once again, those jobs are actually pulled from the working jobs tab. So every job the employee has access to working at is listed here along with that default shift on that job. So furthermore with that, once you go into that particular screen, you have the ability to now edit and actually select the proper shift or task as needed. Now in this screenshot here, notice there's a lot of tasks available for this particular job, which happens to be an Abago job over in our ISS group. But anyways, this Abago job has quite a different task you can pick from. Now, in going back to the question here, if you're trying to use someone as a crew member, and that crew member task is not available, or sorry, you're using it because the one you need is not available, then it's actually something that the financial analyst, your financial director, or someone on your finance team should be able to address, because what's going to happen here is we need to make sure that the task is actually has the job has a valid task associated with it and loaded in the system. So the way it works is every job is loaded with a task model. The task model that's most common across the board is the cleaning task model, which has all the tasks related to cleaning. So your day porter, your window washers, your custodians, your carpet techs, and so forth. Crew member, in this case, what we're talking about is typically a landscaping task. So those jobs that are landscaping, loaded with landscaping models, will have all the tasks as related to landscaping. So in this case, the crew member, irrigation supervisor, irrigation, I forget what that one's called, foreman, all that good stuff, all the ones that are related to landscaping and so forth. The one I'm showing here is an engineering job, if I'm not mistaken. But you have some flexibility there. So yeah, so definitely we can kind of discuss it offline a little bit more. But bottom line, we need to make sure that your job has the right task loaded on it. If they don't, that's probably the stumbling block we're experiencing right now. All right, so furthermore with that, another question is, what's the default task a administrative assistant should use? Well, it all depends, and that's a good question, because most of the time, the tasks that are there, you want to determine if they're going to hit for those that are in the accounting realm will understand what I'm about to say, but you need to understand, where's that task supposed to hit? If it's an overhead job, for example, some of our locations have their labor hit at the district level. That district level is considered a kind of an overhead level. So at those cases, your jobs, your admin assistants and whatnot will hit overhead, and that's kind of a 70,000 series account versus a field employee which working at one of the job sites may hit a 50,000 series account. And in those cases, it all depends obviously on that task and that you choose and where you want to hit. Now, typically there is some, I think there's a title out there called admin overhead that you would use for those 70,000 series accounts. But that would also depend on your financial director where they actually want that labor to hit. I have another one. It says the edit function is not available when we open default shift and task. Is that a setup issue? It's not a setup issue. It all depends on your role. So if you are an editor, submitter, or approver, you should be able to go into that tab and edit the default shift and task. I'm going to show that here in a little screen. If you are any other roles, you may have issues trying to get in there, and that's probably why it's blocked out on you. So if you can't access for any reason, just drop a little help desk ticket. We'll look at that and we'll address your specific role and see what's going on with your access. So let me do this. Let me go one more screen and just keep one more slide here. And just to keep in mind, as a reminder, if the default shift and task are wrong, you can edit and change it, which I'm about to show you how to do that. But you should also make sure that JDE always shows the correct job title and position there for that particular employee. And then you also want to make sure that the desired task is applicable for the job the employee is working. Now, one thing that what typically happens is, we can't go and turn on stuff on the Blue Force side without being valid on the JDE side. Because what will happen is if an employee were working a task, for example, they're supposed to be a custodian, but they're clocking in as engineer, and we open that up for you on the Blue Force side. What's going to happen is, come payroll time, that feed of time is going to go back to JDE, and JDE is going to say, you know what, I'm not accepting this because the task is not valid for this job. So we have to keep both things in sync, and that is why we always refer to any changes being done or needed to be maintained over on the JDE side. So let me go ahead and go into Blue Force real fast and show you this area. And what I'm going to do is I am going to go right now just to an employee. And I'm logged in as what's basically a submitter role. So let's see what I can do here. And I'm actually going to pick an employee here. Let's just pick one of these guys. Okay. Now, one thing I'll notice on your screen here, just so you know, as I mentioned on other previous calls, any area here that is in orange, you're not going to be able to edit those. So anything you see in orange, those are areas that are locked out for you to make any changes. So when you try to edit in those areas, you're going to be a little upset because you can't do anything there. However, these tabs that have blue, you can actually go in and do whatever you need to edit on those particular tabs. The one we're looking at is right here in the middle of the screen. It's called Default Shift and Task. So if I go in there, I'm going to go ahead and clear my green there. Go into my Shift and Task tab. You're going to notice here that this employee can work quite a few different jobs. And if I scroll through here, you're going to notice that you have kind of a big mixed bag of jobs. So like this particular employee, the way he's set up right now, he can work this particular job, and he's a custodian. Whereas if he works this job, his default job task is what's called a mechanic / engineer other. So you can see that you have maybe a little disparity as to what he probably does on a day-to-day basis. Now, once again, this is all driven based on the jobs that he can actually access based on his working jobs tab right in here. And then secondly, based on his job title in JDE. So this employee is a custodian, and we can look him up here in a little bit. And you can see where he's at, but he's a custodian, and I'm looking up here because he's got a cleaning task type that says cleaning. So I'm just going off of that, and assuming that he is a custodian in JDE. So I'm pulling it up. But if he's a custodian in JDE and he has access to all the jobs, in this case Kansas City, what's going to happen is a lot of those jobs in Kansas City are not cleaning jobs. They're actually other kind of lines of business or other types of services they provide there. So in those cases, those jobs still get loaded on his employee record. So give me 1 second here to hold that thought. Let me go back out of here. If I go back to the working jobs tab, you'll see that he's got all these jobs on here, so they're all loaded on there. But the problem is not all these jobs are cleaning jobs. So those jobs that he's loaded with that are not cleaning jobs cannot get custodian loaded to those jobs. That's why then the system comes over the default shift and task tab, finds in the mechanic, engineer, and other as a default on some of these because there's nothing that matches custodian on those jobs. Now, from that perspective, you have the ability now to go in and do other functions as you go through here. So one of the things to keep in mind is that as this employee goes through the day-to-day basis, you can actually go through and do some changes as needed. Okay. So one of the things you can do is obviously first verify, for example, I'm on this particular job right here that's highlighted. At job 500-517, he is right now set up as a, like I said, mechanic / engineer and other. Now, if you wanted to leave him like that, you're more than welcome to do that. There's no reason why you couldn't leave him that. But what's going to happen is, as I mentioned earlier, when the employee goes to try to clock into that job, the system thinks he's a custodian. Okay? He knows he's a custodian, but the system thinks he's a mechanic, engineer, other. When he clocks into that job, the system, if it doesn't prompt him for a task, will assign them to this particular default task in this tab. So from that perspective, you can actually go through and determine whether or not he's on the right path or not to proceed. So keep that in mind. You have the ability now to kind of go through and kind of scroll through and see all these. Now, all these are editable and changeable, and I'll show you how to do that here momentarily. But as you go through this, you have the ability now to go through and see the variety of different tasks he's assigned to. Now, before I go in and show you any of the edit functions, let me go here and also show you that you have a default shift. Now, look at the different shifts. As we go through, you'll notice that one of the shifts on this particular screen is slightly different. So what that is slightly different is just basically saying that that is the default shift that is available. The second line there says 8 to 4 or 8 to 16. That is just the default shift for that job. Now, what typically happens, and I'm going to go off path just a tad, on the lunch rules. If we go in there and try to set up any lunch rules for anybody, what we actually will do is we actually go in and tell you, first off, go into the different shifts that are set up out there and determine what the lunch rules are for your location. So that's the information we gather from you, from all of you. In most cases, if you only have one shift, and it's perfectly fine, some of these jobs will only have one shift. Typically, that is a default shift. Now, let me explain this. A couple of these, as you go through here, you'll see they have a 000 to 2359 shift. That is just a default shift we loaded in the system because, as a requirement, every job needed to have a default shift. So, kind of talking about that little piece, we have to go in there at any point and go in and adjust that accordingly. So just keep that in mind as we go through here. You're going to need to pay attention to that default shift and also that default task. So let me go back in here and give me 1 second. Going through the questions here. I think I may have missed one. Okay, so we're actually good there. All right, so kind of going through here and looking at I'm going to log out real quick. The submitter role that I have here doesn't have that activated right now, so I'm going to go back and make sure that the submitter role is activated so we can actually use the edit functions on here. But on the left-hand side of the column, there is a little edit function that you can actually go through and edit away as needed to each of these particular lines. All right, so let me log out of here. And just for an essence of time, I'm not going to go back in here as I'm logging as my normal login, so we can actually show you the edit functions. All right, so same thing for the main screen. I'm just going to pull up an employee. And I'm actually going to pick Edward this time because I don't want to actually go and edit someone's real task in the system. So I'm going to pick Edward, which is my guinea pig for all these webinars. And on this tab, he has that default shift and task tab. And all I want to do is want to edit his employee his assignment. So for my main office right now, he is assigned to this particular shift, this particular task. If I click on edit, edit's going to give me now an opportunity now to hit the drop down and see the other shifts that are assigned. So maybe Edward really belongs to the night shift, which is a 5 to 10 shift. And he really supposed to be a day a supervisor, not a regular custodian. First off, if I would ever see that scenario where he's a custodian but he's really a supervisor, I will tell you right off the bat, 99.5% of the time, it would be actually at the job title on the employee record in JDE. We didn't hire him correctly at the right title, and that's what's causing this to occur. But like I just did, I can hit the drop down, adjust it accordingly here. Come over to the far left-hand side and click on Update, and that will actually update that particular line. Now it's set in stone. Now, the reason we ask you to go back to JDE is worst push comes to shove, if we ever have to go and update information from JDE and push it down back to Blue Force, JDE is going to say, wait a minute, Blue Force, you have something different in there. Let me update it for you. And at that point, the system will override whatever you have in JDE with what you have in here. So if you're just doing changes in Blue Force, you'll probably cause yourself some trouble later down the road. So that's just a quick overview or a quick discussion on the default shift and task. Essentially, you can go and edit and change that to reflect accordingly. Now, this employee here, Edward, when he clocks into my main office next time, and you can even see that from the actual time card screen. If I ever go in here and let's pick my main office as a job I want to use right now. I'm not sure which one it is offhand, but let's use it. And if I go over here and just say I want to add a new time card for Edward. Let me see where he's at. There he is. And I just want to add a new time card. When I go to add a new time card, you can actually come in here, and the system is just taking its time this morning. But it's trying to load up, and on the screen you will actually go through, since I've already told the system the job and the employee, it will actually pull through that particular employee's default task and whatnot on the part of the time card line. And it's just an update. It might have been the other job. But what should have occurred is that line should actually show you that task automatically defaulted. So it probably hasn't updated itself in the system, but it would actually show it here for you, so automatically key in. So you actually know that it's actually working. So that is kind of the default shift and task tab. And yeah, another question. Yeah, once again, the submitter role, I went and logged off because submitter role wasn't active, so I have to go back and go to the roles here shortly after our webinar and just make sure that's active for everybody. So it'll be active here momentarily once we're done with our call today. All right, so furthermore, moving on, the next thing I want to talk about as far as Granular security is concerned is the holiday and exception date setups that we have available for you. Now, one thing to keep in mind is you have the ability to go in and actually set up these holiday and exception dates. And the question is, what are those? What do they do? Well, these holiday and exception dates work based on worked rules. So basically what happens is this setup will automatically change the rate type of the employee on the given holiday or given exception date that we have set up in the system. This process eliminates the need for all of us on this phone call to go back later to have to edit the time card for that employee. And if you have multiple jobs or multiple dates on a job, we can actually do a mass load via a template that we will provide for you. So essentially what holiday and exception dates do, it allows you to go into the job record, and here on the job record we have a tab called holiday and exception dates, to which we can add a row and enter any holidays or any dates, just general dates, that you would like the system to reflect a different pay type other than regular for the employee. So what I mean by that is some of you on this phone call experienced this during the Christmas or the holidays, whereas maybe some of us worked on that holiday and we had to go back later and then go and change those employees' regular pay types to holiday overtime or holiday double time, or a variety of different reasons because they worked that holiday. What we can do to be proactive here is in the holiday and exception dates tab, we can go in there and hit this add row and go in and actually enter the date of the next holiday that we want to use. In this case, the example I used here is Memorial Day. And what I've done here is told the system that on Memorial Day, I want the system to map the regular time to holiday work 2x. What that means is when someone clocks into this job, and once again, this is on a job-by-job basis, when an employee clocks into this job, their time will automatically map from regular to holiday work to 2x. Meaning if I clock in on that holiday, the system's automatically going to pay me at holiday worked 2 times, which is double time. Now, obviously, throughout the country, we have different scenarios. You may want overtime, just time and a half. You may not want anything at all. You may just want it to say holiday worked. Regardless of the scenario, whether it be a specific date or if it's a holiday, this can be loaded in the system. And you have the opportunity to map the variety of regular. You can map overtime. You can also map double time as needed. Most of the time, we just do the first one to reflect the holiday work, the regular time. So in saying that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over into Blue Force and log back into Blue Force. All right, so Blue Force is coming up. Come on, there you go. All right, so Blue Force is in here. What I will do is now on that particular scenario, if I want to go to the job record, and I'm going to go back to my main office. I'll use that one as the job in question here. Once I go to the job record, at the very bottom of the screen, I have a tab called Holiday and Exception Dates. Now, the Holiday and Exception Dates now allows me to go in and now set up those scenarios as needed. Now, it's called Holiday and Exception Dates because typically it's used for holidays, but you may have an exception date. For example, you may say February the 10th is a training day for all my employees, and I want my regular time to show up as training in the system. So when all my employees clock in, they automatically get coded to training pay. Okay, you may not have training pay out there, it's just an example. Or you may say that on the 10th, I want all of my jobs to reflect double time, because all my employees on Wednesday, because of a union rule, have to work double time. So we can have the system automatically do that for you. That way you don't have to come back later and fiddle with that come at payroll time trying to figure out all the different pay types and change it and make these edits and whatnot. The system's already done that for you. So in this particular example, I had 2 examples that I built a while back. I'm going to build one right now for you. But these examples say that on July the 4th, anybody who worked on July the 4th was automatically going to get paid holiday work 2x. So the system automatically knew and will reflect that on the time card. Whereas also on the 8th, they actually got training pay if they actually clocked in on the 8th. Now once again, this is worked hours. That means that an employee has to punch in to this job on that day in question that's listed here in the system. So simple, I click on add row. I can then go in here and then just go in and say the date. The default today's date, but if I want to, I could click on the little icon to the right of the date field, pick the calendar function, and I can go through and look for the next date available. Let's say May 30th is Memorial Day. That's going to be a holiday that we're typically off, but I have some employees that are going to work. And per the rules or the customer rule or the union rule or just ISS rule, we're going to go and pay this employee a specific rate type. So I can go through here and say, all right, everyone that works that day, and notice here, this is my example. I have every rate type associated to in the company associated to this job for just test reasons and training reasons. But if I go through here, I can look for all the different pay types I have available, find the one I want, and that's not the one I want, but let's see, holiday. And I'm just going to pick one here for sake of time here. There goes, holiday work 2X. And then I actually just say update. That's really all I need to do. Now, one thing you should do before you do anything is notice it's not active. And if you look right here, I'm going to circle this with my pin. It says no right now. What you're going to want to do is go in here and make sure you activate that before you leave the screen. If you don't activate it, and all I'm going to do is go back here and edit, check it, and say update. There we go. At that point, then it's now active. It's yes. The system automatically will start working with it. Now, once you set it up in here, you let it run. You don't have to worry about going back and deactivating it after the fact if the date's already passed. The system automatically will know that when it comes to May the 30th, 2016, anybody that clocks in on that job will automatically get holiday work 2X. So it's something you can set up here. We can actually set it up for you in mass if you have a lot of jobs or if you have a lot of holidays on a job. We can send you a template. We just ask that you go to the help desk, say, hey, I heard about this on the webinar. I want to go ahead and set this up. Tiandra and I will actually send you a template that would have you fill out, and then you will just send that back to us, and we'll upload that into the system, and your exception dates would be created for you. All right, so let's move it on to the next topic, which is reviewing the employee process. And specifically, we've had some concerns, and it's just a short little pieces on the different issues we've had with specifically new hires and terminated employees, and I want to talk a little bit about the pay groups. So first thing on as far as reviewing the employee process is the issues we've had with new hires. And this is a hot topic because I don't think we can go with one payroll cycle without having 10, 20, 30 of these issues popping up around the country. So issues of new hires specifically are we have a lot of new hires that actually come through the system, through Blue Force, that have time before they are hired in the system. Okay? So typically what happens is we have employees that obviously come in, get interviewed, and we say, you know what, we need you to start working tonight. Can you start working immediately? They say yes. We obviously are still doing their background checks sometimes, in some cases. In some cases, we're still doing paperwork. We have not entered into JDE, but they're already technically employed and hired and actually working. So in those cases, when the paperwork is finally done, the hire dates are entered incorrectly into the system. So what happens there, one of the key things to keep in mind is we have employees having time before they're hired in the system, which then means that the hire dates in JDE cannot be after they have already started working. So in that particular example that I mentioned here in green is that employee A here has a hire date of February the 5th in JDE. That really means that they started working on February the 2nd. So 3 days there are going to be actually going to have some issues entering them in the system because A, Blue Force is actually not going to create that employee record or make that employee record available until that hire date is met. So when I'm going back in the system and trying to manually enter some time for him back to the 2nd, I'm going to have, because the system's going to say can't do it because he was hired or at a start date of February the 5th. Now more so with that, even if it gets past that point and actually gets into JDE, you're going to create a scenario where the employee's time is going to be rejected in JDE, which means the employee would have to be, the employee hire date would have to be corrected in JDE before anything can proceed. Now, here's one caveat with this. If the employee has already been paid, let's say we didn't correct the issue the first time around, first pay cycle, if he's already been paid, then we're going to be up going upstream without a paddle, because it's going to be very hard to go in there and change that, because we have a lot of information built off of that start date and hire date that's actually going to be critical, and it's going to be very hard to make that a change. So one of the things we stress all the time is new hires, make sure that the hire date is correct in JDE before we proceed with payroll, because if it isn't, then we have a little trouble fixing it later. Now, issues with terminated employees. Now, on the flip side of this, typically it's common that we may be in the middle of a pay period and an employee gets termed. Now, when an employee gets termed in JDE, within the next 30 minutes, they become inactive in Blue Force. That means they can no longer clock in and clock out. So A, make sure you terminate the right employee. Otherwise, you can have some other issues. But more specifically, if that employee needs to get paid for time worked and is already terminated in the system, we're going to be able to send time from Blue Force over to JDE. However, employees cannot be terminated in JDE until all the time they have worked has been paid. More specifically, it's because JDE is going to reject that time that we're trying to send from Blue Force, because that employee is no longer active in the system. So to correct that, the employees are going to have to go in, be temporarily rehired in the system, let us process a payroll, and then when we finish payroll, then they're going to have to go and be terminated out of JDE again. Now, when terminated, you must enter the correct termination date. So let's not just go through the motion and say, we terminated the guy back on January the 15th, but we're going to do it today on the 9th of February. Well, you know what we've done is we've actually maybe caused some issues, because it's going to affect any benefits due to them. It's going to affect any unemployment due to them, and etc. So it's important from that standpoint that we're also getting that date correct for terminated employees. All right. And then the last little topic as far as the employee process goes is the nice topic of pay groups. Now this one's got a little longer, lengthy sections, because pay group is a large piece of the Blue Force puzzle. So the first question I always get is, what are pay groups and why do we have them? So first off, pay groups are basically a logical grouping of employees based on shared characteristics that facilitate payroll processing because of a common requirement. Now typically these pay groups are based on employee type, pay frequency, same country location, and so forth. So for example, we have pay groups all over the country. Typical pay group would be based on, the first commonality of a pay group is the pay week. The weeklies and the bi-weeklies and semi-monthlies, those are going to be grouped in those separate areas. From there, then we look and say, all right, what company are you part of? What area are you part of? I'm in Memphis, I'm in Houston, I'm in Dallas, I'm in Kansas City, and so forth. So from that point, you would have, if say Memphis in this case was a weekly payroll, we would have a pay group called Memphis Weekly, and that would be that pay group. Now from that, we go one step further and determine if are they union scenarios there, or are there non-union scenarios. So we go through that and determine, do we need a union pay group or a non-union pay group? If there are union pay groups, then we go through the next phase of determining how many different unions are there. So that's why we have so many pay groups. As I go through here, each are basically generally they're determined based on the base janitorial office, and typically those base janitorial offices have one pay group. Like I mentioned on here, some are depending on the union requirements. If you're up in the Northeast, if you're in Kansas City, in the Midwest, or you're out in California, those typical areas have tons and tons of pay groups because of the different union requirements. Now, IFS is a little different. IFS is grouped on like rules, both geographically and per union requirements. So on the IFS side, we have a California pay group. That's a semi-monthly group. We have a large part of the country in another pay group, which is just a non-union bi-weekly group, and so forth. So it just depends on a couple different factors and to how many pay groups your area is going to be responsible for. Now, what do they control? Well, these pay groups are controlling OT policies. They're controlling exception rules in regards to pay type. So rounding policies, applicable pay types, setups such as punch pairing rules, the type of pay period, and the first day of the week. So we have it pretty set pretty easily that all pay groups are set up with a start date of Saturday. That's pretty cut and dry across the board. However, if we ever have a requirement otherwise that says that we need to start a pay group on Monday and end it on Sunday, then we can actually do that, and we would actually create a pay group to control that. Pay groups control OT policies because a pay group over in California may require us to have overtime paid at 8 hours after 8 hours a day, or 40 hours over a week, or have some other rules apply to that, whereas pay groups in Texas only focus on a 40-hour work week, so anything over 40. So that's where the overtime rules come into play. Exception rules in regards to pay types. If we wanted to set up some of the exception rules that look at certain pay types, we do that at a pay group level. Rounding policy. All of our rounding policies are based on pay group. If we ever chose to say, the state of California says we can no longer do rounding there, well, then we'll have pay groups for all the jobs and employees in California and turn off that rounding rule for them. So we have everything kind of built out in these little groupings, and within that we have different controls that we can actually apply in the system. So the question that always becomes is, can they be changed on the employee record? Well, every employee is assigned a pay group, and a lot of people don't realize that every job also is assigned to be a part of one of these pay groups. Now, from the job side, this serves more of a default setting, and that's really all it is. Should something not occur correctly on the employee side, on the employee record, then the job setting there for pay group is only as a default or a fallback setting. Typically, it doesn't get used, but it has to be set up on the job level in Blueforce. Really doesn't affect anybody or involve anybody in this phone call. Just wanted to just stress that. Now, from the employee side, yeah, you can change employees. The employees can jump from a pay group to pay group. However, that change typically occurs on Saturday mornings as not to interfere with the current pay week calculations. So anytime we do anything to do with pay, especially with pay groups, the system automatically can do that for us, but that's done on a Saturday early morning, kind of at the start of the next pay week. Now, this cannot be changed to reflect a prior close period. So if someone should have had a pay group change 2 months ago, we can't go back and change that. And lastly, we can force a pay change in the middle of a pay week. However, that's something we ask you to do via a help desk ticket. If someone gets hired incorrectly, and that's one thing I'll stress here, when you hire somebody, one of the functionalities on the JDE employee record, many of you may not touch JDE, but regardless, whenever you hire an employee in JDE, there is a setting there called pay group. If that is left blank or it's incorrect, the system is going to send that information over to Blueforce. Blueforce is going to be set up with a default pay group for that employee based on their default job. This is where that job connection goes to the pay group, and it's going to assign it. So let's say it's a union employee, and the job is set up as a non-union pay group. Guess what? That employee now has a non-union pay group assigned to his or her employee record. Now, in saying that, all of their rules, all of their groupings, when they get paid, all that good stuff is going to be based on that incorrect pay group. So that's when we typically get an email, we typically get a phone call saying, help, I need this change because the employee was set up incorrectly. Once again, it needs to be corrected in JDE first, and either A, we're going to wait till Saturday to do that, or if we need to force it through, we need to have a help desk ticket to go ahead and address that for you. So make sure, just put a help desk ticket, and we can assist you with that. So real quick, just to go through a couple slides here of the overtime breakout so you can see what it looks like. You don't have access to go in here and change anything, but I want to just show you what all entails some of the setup when he talks about pay groups. So all these pay groups we have set up, we go in there and set up overtime rules. In the example here, I have an overtime rule that says it's a bi-weekly period that the OT rules are calculated on a week-to-week basis. So overtime is calculated after 40 hours the first week and 40 hours the second week. Notice here also we have the first day of the week at the bottom of the screen, so we can tell the system when the start of the week begins, so it automatically knows how to take it from week to week. We also have pay groups, exceptions, in which we can go in here and tell the system on certain days of the week, we want that rate type to work a certain way. So a little while ago, I showed you the date exception, so I can go with specific dates. At the pay group level, I can go at a higher level. I could say that anybody that works Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, there's no exception. It's regular pay. But at any time they work on Saturday and Sunday, I want to go in and edit the screen, make it active, and say weekend pay automatically gets paid at double time. So I can go in here and set up an exception for the pay group that says anybody in this pay group gets paid double time on the weekends. So that's what this exception rule is. It allows you to expand on that particular exception setup. Now, furthermore, we have the rounding policies that we have that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So we can go in here and set up rounding rules. So right now, that's the rounding rule we have set up, round to the nearest quarter hour or 15 minutes. We can go in there and change it. If a customer or a union comes in and says, or maybe federal law comes through somewhere down the road and says, nope, the rounding rule can be set up at a half-hour rule, then we can go here and adjust it. Or we can say round to the nearest 7 minutes if need be. We have the right different settings that we can assign to the rounding functionality in the system. And then also we have applicable pay types. Now this is the one that typically we get a lot of calls on, because whenever you're doing payroll, you're going to say, you know what, I don't have bereavement available for me. Or I don't have birthday pay available for me, as my union requires that we pay our employees birthday pay. Or I'm in an area that I need snow pay, and snow pay is not available to me. Can you add that for me? All these are available on this particular screen. What we would do, either myself or Tiana would go in and set up those rate types for you. We'd bring them from the left side of the screen, assign them over to the right-hand side, and make them available for you to use on a day-to-day basis. So whenever you don't see a pay type you need, this is a screen that we're working in. So kind of wanted to go through, and you'll see at the very top of the screen, you have a variety of different tabs that we can actually use from a pay group standpoint. Now, once again, you don't have really full control of the pay group. The pay groups are governed by your office kind of standard or setup there, and then from there we go into look at the different union versus non-union scenarios, and then from there we look at all the different union scenarios and determine how many different pay groups or scenarios are we dealing with. So up in the New York area, I mean, I can tell you that you have 8 to 10 pay groups that you deal with, because you have so many employees dealing with so many different unions, and within that you have a lot of non-union employees. So that's why you have kind of a vast number of pay groups in that part of the country. So kind of going through today, just as I mentioned, I wanted to go through kind of the hot topics as far as it relates to the employee process, make sure you understood the process of the new hires and the termed employees, and also kind of get a kind of sneak peek in as to how to address pay groups and kind of what that does for us. Now, kind of wrap up today, I just wanted to bring your attention to tomorrow that we are having a Blue Force WebPunch Webinar. We haven't had a WebPunch webinar in a while, but WebPunch is another way of clocking into the system. So for those that are interested in seeing that, please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. The links were in your Epay update. And it's basically geared to the people that are going to use the WebPunch to record time and view schedules. And once again, it's recommended to anybody that's editors, submitters, or approvers, or having employees that are going to use this. So you can invite some employees, you can invite yourselves to kind of see this process. A cool little function we have. It's all internet-based, and it's called WebPunch. And then support-wise, remember, always contact us for any assistance you may need. Be sure, if you're contacting either myself or Tiana, go through the help desk. We get inundated with emails, and it makes it very hard for us to stay on tap and kind of without going through all our emails consistently. So if you go through the help desk, it allows us to actually and we kind of address them as the issues are coming through. It's a lot quicker if you go through the help desk. So with that, just want to say thank you again for joining us today on our Epay Tips and Changes. We do this every Tuesday and Thursday, so Thursday we'll see the same session again. And if you have any suggestions or topics you want to hear, drop me a note, and we'll be glad to incorporate those topics in a future session. With that, have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll talk to you again real soon on an upcoming webinar.